Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to Two Nates on Sports. My name is Nathan Simmons, and with me, as always, is Nathan Kwan. We have a lot to discuss, and I believe congratulations are in order. Congrats to the Astros. You made a baby. World Series prediction from SI coming to fruition. What do you say?
Woo! That's what I say from our boy Ric Flair, who said play ball before Game 7. But yeah, the Astros, as I correctly predicted, won't beat the Yankees in 7 games, coming back from 3-2 down, winning 2 home games, and they advanced to their second ever World Series. This series was crazy. The home team won every single game of the series, and it was the first 2 were 2-1 nail biters with Dallas Keuchel and Justin Verlander shutting down the Yankees offense. And then the 3 games in New York, I was concerned about the Yankees pitching coming into the series, and holy cow, their starting pitching was sensational. And something about Yankee Stadium, the Astros offense just completely disappeared, and they couldn't get any runs on the board, and they lost every game there. The one game they had a chance in was Game 4, and the bullpen, which was another of my keys going into the postseason, just completely collapsed with Chris Davinsky, Joe Musgrove, and Ken Giles combining to blow a 4-1 lead in the 7th inning. But it's over and done with. I mean, I will say props to the Yankees for a hell of a series. That team is going to be so good in the upcoming years with their young talent on that team, led by Aaron Judge, but also Greg Bird, Didi Gregorius, and all that pitching. I mean, Luis Severino is so young. He's coming off a breakout year where he was an all-star. He's going to be good for years to come. Tanaka found something again in the playoffs where he struggled so much during the regular season. But there's something about this Astros team at home at Minute Maid Park. Jose Altuve, I don't know what you can say about this guy that hasn't been said already, but he is the MVP. He has 2 home runs in the final 2 games. And the pitching, Justin Verlander, 9 starts as a Houston Astro, 9 wins. That trade cannot have been more important looking back on it. And he was named ALCS MVP. Also, last night in Game 7, Charlie Morton, what can you say about the job he did? 5 shutout innings. And then Lance McCullers coming in and getting the final 4 innings and getting his first career save. Something special about this Astros team right now. And going into a World Series against a very tough Dodgers opponent, I guess, Nathan, what is your thoughts, I guess, on this team this past week with the ALCS and then going into the World Series?
The Astros were my pick to make it all the way to the World Series from the AL side, and I mean not at the beginning of the year, obviously, but once the playoffs started, like, this team was just top down, except for really the bullpen. But even then, the bullpen I felt was solid enough that it wasn't a killer weakness for this team. I know a lot of people were panicking once the Astros were down 3-2 in the series, and it looked like all might be lost. But I mean, at the same time, like, you have Verlander, who's been pitching out of his mind ever since he became an Astro. And obviously he delivered. I will say, I mean, this Dodgers team looks very difficult to stop. I mean, again, you have the starting rotation there that's really stepped up. Obviously, having Darvish and Kershaw will do that. That also being said, you do have to consider some of the injuries that have happened to this Dodgers team. I mean, Corey Seager is questionable heading into the final series of the entire season. And I mean, you have to think that he'll try to find a way to get on the field somehow. But at the same time, like, this is a Dodgers team that is nursing some of its wounds. I mean, yes, this was the team with the best record in the regular season and has proven it so far this playoffs. But at the same time, I think this Astros team really believes in itself. And I know it's hard to measure that, but at the same time too, I mean, just going back to it, like, this is a very well-rounded team. You have the starting pitching, which is phenomenal. You've already touched on all that. I mean, the hitting, yeah, it kind of disappeared a little bit during the ALCS, but at the same time, it was able to shine through when it mattered against as you pointed out, a very tough New York Yankees pitching staff. And so I'll pick the Astros in this one. I'll go the full Game 7. What say you?
Yeah, the Dodgers have been the best team in baseball the whole regular season. They had a little blip in September, and Evan Tenenbaum, amongst others, were concerned about this team, but they've just picked it up in the playoffs. there was talk of this team going undefeated and winning it all this year. But you mentioned the pitching they've gotten from Clayton Kershaw, Rich Hill, Yu Darvish, and then even Alex Wood had a good start in Game 4 in Chicago. But that frontline starting pitching, and then that bullpen might be better. Kenley Jansen's lights out on the back end, but then you have Kenta Maeda's in there now, Tony Watson, Brandon Morrow, Stripling, Baez. Those are guys that have just been locking down the games late for the Dodgers, and they've won so many low-scoring games that their offense that we talked about top down that has been so good for them. They haven't really had to do much, especially in that NLCS series. I mean, Justin Turner is the leader, but Yasuo Puig has been great. Cody Bellinger is going to win the National League Rookie of the Year, and then Chris Taylor coming out of nowhere, being the super utility player that the Astros kind of have in Marwin Gonzalez as well. And you mentioned they didn't even have one of their offensive leaders in Corey Seager in the NLCS, and they were still able to beat up a Cubs team that was the defending champs. And so if I'm going to say on paper, I'm going to pick the Dodgers to win in 6 games, but I just have a feeling about this Astros team that there's just something about it that you can't really explain. Their offense was so bad in that Yankee series. They were dead to rights. You could see it on their face, but there's something about just how they rallied. I mean, similar to the whole run this year is they have that Houston Strong patch on their jersey and rallying behind the city of Houston to try to lift their spirits. I just think that they're going to find some way to do it, and it's going to be led by the starting pitching with Dallas Keuchel and Justin Verlander at the top. And I think the bullpen will be able to put it together. They had their struggles in that Yankee series, and that's a big factor in the series. If the Astros have the lead late, they have to be able to close the game. Ken Giles has to bounce back. Will Harris has to bounce back. Chris Davinsky has to bounce back. And another factor, I guess, is also the starting pitchers in the bullpen. We saw Colin McHugh come in, throw 4 shutout innings. Brad Peacock had a couple of appearances in the bullpen, and he was fairly effective, gave up a couple home runs to Aaron Judge and Gary Sanchez. But I like him as a one-inning setup role. And then you saw what Lance McCullers did. The way AJ Hinch lines up his pitching in the series is going to be key. But, I mean, I see Charlie Morton starting Game 3, Lance McCullers starting Game 4, and then you have McHugh and Peacock if needed. Offensively, it's going to be all on Jose Altuve and Carlos Correa. They were basically the 2 guys that carry the Astros in the ALCS. But they're going to need more. George Springer really struggled. Josh Reddick had 1 hit the whole 7 games of the series. Mark Gonzalez only had 2 hits the whole series. So that's something that they're going to have to fix against a really good Dodgers team. I mean, in the end, against my better baseball judgment, against what I believe is the best team in baseball this year and probably the deserving champ, I'm going to pick the Houston Astros because they are my team. They are playing for the city of Houston, and why not? Houston in 7.
All right, awesome. We're in agreement on that. But now let's move on to the NFL. We have 2 weeks to cover. Fortunately, though, both Texas teams had off weeks during that period. The Cowboys with week 6 one, and then week 6 one, and then the Texans with the week 7 one. So, do you have anything to say about the Texans beating up on the Cleveland Browns?
Not really. I mean, they took care of business against a pretty abysmal Browns team that was starting Kevin Hogan in place of Sean Kaiser, and Kevin Hogan's not an NFL caliber quarterback. And as I mentioned in the podcast the week previous, that defense desperately, with all those injuries that they had to J.J. Watt and Whitney Merciless, they needed a bad opponent, and they were able to gain some more confidence. They really shut down the Browns offense. And Deshaun Watson continued his stellar play against a pretty decent Browns defense, but he was able to spread the ball around. I mean, he continues to find both Will Fuller and DeAndre Hopkins, which Brock Osweiler really struggled with last year. And the confidence in Bill O'Brien's play calling, he's totally opening up the playbook. They're seeing jet sweeps now, direct quarterback sneaks with Deshaun Watson. And I think as weeks go on, you can see just the Texans offense continue to get better despite having a very poor offensive line. So, I mean, they're coming off a bye next week with a very tough test against a great Seattle defense. And so that's going to be another big test for Deshaun Watson. And we'll see how that offense, which has put up 30 points 4 straight weeks. Certainly a tough test to do that in Seattle, but we'll see what happens. That defense, again, they're not going to be as good as they were without Watt and Merciless, but the secondary did show some signs of turning it around last week, and we'll see if they can hold up going forward.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Looks like also both the Cowboys and Texans had fairly weak teams to beat up on the past 2 weeks. The Cowboys today finished destroying the San Francisco 49ers 40-10. With this, I mean, it's hard to really talk too much about this game beyond just like they did what they needed to do, which was beat up a weak team, which I mean sounds really unfair, but at the same time, it is what it is. I mean, Ezekiel almost got 150 yards, even after being sat out for most of the fourth quarter. Dak Prescott had 3 touchdown passes and ran 1 in for also being sat down for most of the fourth. We also got to see Sean Lee and David Irving finally be on the same field at the same time, and it looked good. Definitely looked good. There were 5 sacks, two of which led to fumbles being recovered by Dallas. There were actually a total of three overall turnovers, all of which were fumble recoveries. This defense looked a heck of a lot better than it has the past 2 weeks, but that also being said, but at the same time, you can't exactly say that this is going to be the same dominant defense going forward. I mean, because unfortunately, this is against a very, very bad San Francisco 49ers team. You're at least happy to see them take care of business if you're a Cowboys fan, and that's really all you ask for. Also, shout out to Brian for tying Hayes as the all-time leader in reception touchdowns in Cowboys history. Also, another note around the NFL, probably the biggest news over the past 2 weeks is that Aaron Rodgers is probably going to miss the rest of the season with a broken collarbone. This really changes up the AFC North as well as the wild card picture. Yeah, I mean, like you don't wish for an injury to any player, even after the week after they beat your team at the last second. So I wish him a speedy recovery.
Yeah, most definitely. Another year where, again, we just see how football is just such a violent sport. And you can arguably build a Pro Bowl team with all the guys that have been lost for the year with injuries of Aaron Rodgers, Odell Beckham Jr. for the Giants, J.J. Watt for the Texans. NFL is a really physical game, and it's tough to see those injuries. But as they say, next man up. And we'll see if Green Bay can stay in the wild card hunt. But let's move on. Let's talk about the NBA, which had its first week, and my Houston Rockets are 3-0. The good is that they upset the Warriors on opening night, beat the Kings the next night, and then last night they beat a pretty bad Mavericks team. The bad news is Chris Paul is out, and we don't know how long he's going to be out. He has a knee issue, and they're saying anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks, and so the Rockets offense has pretty much reverted to what they were last year with James Harden running the point. And then you have those shooters in Eric Gordon and Ryan Anderson and Trevor Ariza. And also, I think a big key this year so far has been Clint Capella. He's been great. I mentioned him briefly on the NBA preview, how he could be a potential X factor as taking a next step forward in his 4th NBA year. But he had 22 points and 17 rebounds in that win in Sacramento. And also, guys, we mentioned that they signed. PJ Tucker had 20 points and 6 rebounds in the opening night win in Oakland. And Luke Mamute also provided great defense and shot making for the team as well. So I think the Rockets are off to a good start. But again, that Chris Paul thing is very troubling because you gave up a lot to get him. And you're hoping that he, along with James Harden, are able to build some chemistry and ultimately have a shot at taking down the Warriors in a 7-game series. And it's good that it's happened early in the year, that you can get it taken care of and not have it linger towards the playoffs. But Chris Paul's a guy who's in his 30s now, and every injury like this really scares you because he's had trouble with injuries the last several years, and Rockets fans certainly don't want to see that.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, with the flip side for the Mavs, they've had their fair share of injuries already. And although it's not to a veteran, it's still to someone that's very important to this Mavs team, if not more so. Dennis Smith Jr. actually had a great debut against the Atlanta Hawks. He had 16 points, 10 assists. He was the youngest person to ever get a points, assists, double in their debut game, beating out Jason Kidd, so another famous Mavericks rookie. So that hopefully bodes well in terms of future career performance. But unfortunately, he's now missed the last 2 games due to a leg injury. And this team is clearly worse off without him. They lost to a not very young, very inexperienced Sacramento Kings team, and then got destroyed by, as you said, a very good Rockets team. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what exactly the plan is. I mean, you have Nerlens Noel only getting 19 points in the first game. And while he looked great in that game, since then he hasn't exactly been able to carry this team. Harrison Barnes, same thing. Dirk is looking his age, unfortunately, sadly. Breaks my heart to say that. But, I mean, we saw what happened last year when this team got off to a really horrible start. And this looks like another team that could just as easily do that, if not to a far worse extent. And yet this team, if it's able to get everyone back healthy, should still be a better team because of Dennis Smith Jr. than the team that they were able to field last year. And that team was able to go from a worst record to having the 9th worst record. We'll see how it goes. We'll see what the plans are. I mean, hopefully they give more time to Nerlens Noel.
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, another top draft pick would probably do this team well down the road. So again, it's not so much about the record this year for the Dallas Mavericks as, again, continued progression from those young guys, Dennis Smith Jr., Nerlens Noel, Harrison Barnes, see if he can continue on this breakout year he had last year, seeing the play of those guys, and obviously reminiscing about every Dirk Nowitzki moment that you guys have enjoyed over the past 20 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much top talent in this upcoming draft that would really fit with the Mavs going forward. Even if they decide to go for one of the top veterans in the free agent market. So I mean, this team has a lot of options going forward, and it does have a bright future. It just needs to be careful with its young players, its young core, and try to keep them healthy going forward.
Yep. And this upcoming week, the Houston Rockets play the Memphis Grizzlies. They're going to play the Grizzlies 4 times, I think, before December. So get used to that matchup. And then they go out east to play the Sixers and the Charlotte Hornets. The Mavs this week, they have Golden State at home, Memphis at home, and then they're at Memphis. But let's talk briefly about college football. And since our last podcast, the University of Texas Longhorns have unfortunately lost 2 tough games to the 2 Oklahoma schools. Last week in Dallas at the Cotton Bowl, they lost 29-24, a game they fell behind 20-0, but they were able to come back behind a gutsy performance from Shane Buechele. The defense playing a lot better in the second half, but they weren't able to finish that game as they busted coverage and Baker Mayfield threw a touchdown late to grab the win for the Sooners. And then yesterday in Austin against the 10th ranked team in the country, Oklahoma State, the Longhorns hung around, and I was very surprised that they were able to hold down the Cowboys' great offense and Mason Rudolph, who was a fringe Heisman contender going into this year. That great offense and the receiving core of James Washington, but they held them to 13 points in overtime, and really they had a chance to win it, but Sam Ehlinger was intercepted in the end zone in overtime as the Longhorns are going in for the winning score. Again, the record's not there, but we're seeing signs from Tom Herman and his team that they're in these close games against 2 really Big 12 contenders this year. And arguably they could have won both of these games very easily down the stretch. And so I think my motto, I guess, is trust the process for this team.
Yeah, we're very much like the Philadelphia 76ers at this point when it comes to looking at this team. Like really every close loss is a win for the Longhorns. And I mean, you look at the performance of this defense, like ever since the Maryland game, now they've been able to shut down these top offenses with like Heisman candidates, with USC having Sam Darnold, OU with Baker Mayfield, as well as OSU with Mason Rudolph. I mean, this defense is far better than the one that was coached under Charlie Strong, who was supposed to be a defensive whiz. And so I think it's very clear that Tom Orlando, the defensive coordinator, as well as as Tom Herman know what they're doing with the talent that they have, and so it's paying dividends, and like it should be a jumping off point for recruiting going forward. And once the results coming in, then like recruiting should take off so quickly under Herman. It's going to be good. It's going to be good.
Yeah, and I think Malik Jefferson's a completely different player ever since that first week against Maryland. I mean, he's been so overhyped, and I think undeservedly so the first couple of years he's been at UT. But this year, he's really taken off under defensive coordinator Todd Orlando, and you've seen Chris Boyd play well as well. Offense has struggled, but you have to remember that offensive line is just completely beset by injuries. You don't lose an All-America like Connor Williams and just expect that the next man up can replace him. And you have a freshman quarterback there in Sam Ehlinger, and he's going to make his share of freshman quarterback mistakes. So you just have to trust grooming of Tom Herman on that young offense, and hopefully you get a little bit more on the running game. But again, the offensive line has just been so inconsistent with those injuries up there that it's, and we see it in the NFL as well. It's really hard to make a good offense with a bad offensive line. But I mean, going forward, I see this team being able to make a bowl. They're 3-4 at this point. They need 3 more wins. I think there's 3 more winnable games on the schedule. One of them is this upcoming week against a Baylor team that is very bad. They also have a home game against Kansas, and although they lost to them last year, I expect them to be able to beat bad Kansas team. And then after that, you have Texas Tech home game, and then you have at West Virginia, at TCU. So that's 1 out of 3. Obviously, the Texas Tech home game the day after Thanksgiving would be the best shot at getting you bowl eligible. But
now let's move on. I believe you have some MLS news you'd like to talk about.
Yeah, Dynamo in the playoffs. Woo! So they clinched last week, getting a draw in Kansas City 0-0. It was pretty much the most entertaining 0-0 game I've ever seen. A lot of shots, a lot of open play. Tyler Derrick, the Dynamo goalkeeper, basically got them the point, as he had some sensational saves in that game. And then today against Chicago on decision day, they beat the Fire 3-0 with basically a team of a lot of backups because they are playing in the playoffs midweek, and head coach Wilmer Cabrera wanted to kind of rest some of his key guys. They were able to beat a Chicago Fire team that was fighting to be the number 2 seed in the East and get a first round bye. So that's a very impressive result. And what it means is, because Kansas City lost today in Salt Lake City to Real Salt Lake, that they're going to host a first round playoff game on Thursday night against Kansas City. So again, whether or not they advance in that game against a very veteran Kansas City team, I think they have a shot. Anytime they're playing at home in the playoffs, they have a very good chance. Houston always turns up for the playoffs, but bigger picture, Wilmer Cabrera did a hell of a job with this team this year. Obviously, the signings of those Honduran wingers and Romel Kyoto and Albert Feliz definitely helped, but the ability of him to turn the players he had into believing that could make the playoffs and also putting them in the right positions. This team the last couple of years has really lacked an identity, and the lineups week to week changed, the formations week to week changed, but this team knew the way that they were going to play every week, which was to play solid defense and then try to counter with those outstanding wingers that they have, and they were able to get into the playoffs, and we'll see how far they can go. As far as FC Dallas, well, we talked about their struggles all year. They lost last week in Seattle 4-0, which basically meant they needed help today from Minnesota United to get in the playoffs. The FC Dallas was able to get a 5-1 win today, but unfortunately, San Jose got a 93rd minute goal to clinch their spot in the playoffs. So FC Dallas ends up at 46 points, and they're on the outside looking in. But looking into next year for that team, just so much returning talent. It's just, for some reason, this team wasn't able to get it done this year.
Yeah, congrats to the Houston Dynamo for sure for making it to the playoffs. For FC Dallas, it's been a really disappointing season. They started off pretty well with the first half, and then just ever since, this has been a team that seems both unfocused, lacking in energy. I think part of it may just be because they played so much soccer last year and this year that it's just taken its toll. And I think a lot of the young players that this team had depended on have been looking elsewhere and have not been focused on winning for this team. That's just sort of how it goes in MLS, especially since it's still really not one of the top leagues, in spite of the fact that it has had such a great infusion of talent and has had such a great infusion of interest among the American public. At the end of the day, the goal is to still either like go play for one of the top leagues in the world, and unfortunately, MLS is not really considered that still.
Yeah, that's a good point with FC Dallas. Last year, they were in 3 different competitions with the U.S. Open Cup. And then this year, because they did so well last year, they had to play the Champions League in CONCACAF. They also made a deep U.S. Open Cup run again. And of course, a lot of their players were key in the World Cup qualifying hopes for their respective countries. So yeah, a lot of maybe tired legs for FC Dallas that puts them just short of the playoffs. But looking ahead this week is the knockout round. In the Western Conference, you have Vancouver, which was the #1 seed going into today's games, but they lost to Portland, and so they dropped all the way down to the 3 seed. They play a San Jose team that has a very bad goal differential, but they ended up sneaking in the playoffs, and Vancouver hasn't really had success in that area in their history. So we'll see if they are able to get past San Jose. As I mentioned, the Dino play Sporting Kansas City at home. I think that's a winnable game for either team. And in the East, Chicago plays the New York Red Bulls, and Atlanta, upstart Atlanta, the expansion team, plays Columbus in the 4-5 matchup. We'll see how Columbus does. They were in the news this past week as Columbus Crew owner is trying to move that team to Austin. Basically, the situation is what professional sports is in this country, which is when we're a billionaire owner and we want something, stadium, new trinkets, we threaten for our team to leave. And despite that stadium only being 18 years old, built in 1999 as the first soccer-specific stadium in the United States, it's hosted numerous U.S. men's national teams matches over the years. And the Columbus Crew are an original MLS franchise. The owner wants a new downtown stadium, despite his stadium being only 6 miles from downtown in Columbus. So they're trying to move to Austin, which is very interesting. As we mentioned before, Austin is one of the teams that is looking to get as an expansion team in MLS. Question is, where would you put a soccer stadium in downtown Austin, given the lack of space right now in that city with a lot of development? I'm not really sure how this is going to work out and what to make of this. What do you think, Nathan?
I'm struggling just as much as you is to think of a place to put that soccer stadium. I mean, the only place I can think, there's plenty of spaces in terms of just like parkland, but I mean, Austin is pretty protective of its park spaces, so can't really see them being able to use that. Part of me wanted to say DKR, but no, they can't touch that.
Evan Tenenbaum has said maybe they renovate House Park, which is a stadium that played host to the Austin Aztecs, the USL team, for a couple of years. But I mean, that stadium had extensive flood damage, and also it's turf and only has 6,500 seats. And so that's going to be a massive renovation.
At this point, like, it's either massive renovation or build a new one. So both are going to be real expensive.
Right. And I think just larger ramifications is the impact of San Antonio. They're not going to get an expansion team if Austin has a team. And that really stinks for them because they've built up the infrastructure. They have their own soccer-specific stadium already. They've had support for that team in the USL and NASL. So this would be a blow for San Antonio if Austin were able to get a team. And also, again, you're ripping an original MLS out of Columbus and you're moving it out of that market. And this is just like the NFL, right? You're taking 18 years of a fan base and you're saying, no, I want a new stadium, even though it's not justified at all.
Yeah.
And it's just sad.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's just also like Austin, no offense to Austin, but it doesn't really have exactly a great track record of supporting soccer teams. So, I mean, to me, it doesn't, like if you had to choose between Austin and San Antonio, it makes no sense to me to not just go with San Antonio. You know, if we're going for that Central Texas market, like San Antonio all the way. I mean, no offense to Austin, my hometown right now, but you know, that truth should be very obvious.
Like, it is a business, and in the end, you want to be able to make money. And I know that Columbus has struggled with attendance in the recent years. I think some of that is the team just hasn't been that good. I know they're a playoff team this year, and they made MLS Cup a couple of years ago, but I don't know the specifics of group fan dynamics. But again, you just look at the U.S. men's national team putting World Cup qualifying matches in that stadium, and it's filled to the brim, and it's always a great atmosphere. I think Don Garber, the commissioner of MLS, has done a lot for the game of soccer and growing MLS, but I really think that he's made a couple of blunders over the years, and I've been very critical of him not fixing the refereeing. I mean, if you want to be a world-class league, you have to have better officiating in making sure that you have fair results in these games. And also some of his expansion moves, giving New York another team, trying to give another team to LA, even though the Galaxy haven't had the greatest support, and then trying this Miami experiment over and over again, trying to get that David Beckham team upstarted, even though Miami has shown no history of having a fan support for soccer, and especially being a very soft sports market. So, I mean, this would just be another one where they would lose an original MLS team for pure greed. Let's move on to shout outs. So you have some NHL shout outs.
NHL shout outs. Dallas Stars have won 4 games in a row now. I mean, they got off to a bit of a rough start, but it looks like they're finally turning things around off the back of Ben Bishop. I mean, some of the forwards haven't exactly been performing up to expectations, but I mean, it looks like this team has finally seemed to hit some semblance of a balance. I mean, they still have to figure out that defensive core. I mean, to me, like, deep pairs there that should work, that they should try, but for whatever reason, they're not trying them. So my guess is that, like, Ken Hitchcock is still trying to even out the pairings according to skill level as well as experience. But it'd be far easier to just put your best pair out there, give them the most amount of minutes, and then try to do that with the second, and then with the third pair, you let them get used to the ice and prove themselves out from there. But that's not exactly what Ken Hitchcock is trying right now. But I mean, again, kudos to Ben Bishop and the rest of the team, and the defense hopefully will turn things around.
Yeah, also shout out to Curran Roach, who dunked over his mom at UT basketball's Texas tip-off scrimmage. Also shout out to the Dallas Cowboys, who are going to host the 2018 NFL Draft at AT&T Stadium. That should be a nice atmosphere for the team, as they probably will have a lot of fans booing Roger Goodell for how he's handled this whole Ezekiel Elliott situation, as well as other issues around the league. And my final shout out is to Carson Riley. He's a 7th grade kid from Liberty Hill, Texas. He attended game 2 of the ALCS between the Astros and Yankees, and he caught a home run ball from Carlos Correa just outside of the outstretched leap of Aaron Judge. And the Houston Chronicle did a story on him, and really a remarkable story. The only reason they were at the game was it was Carson's idea. He had an older brother who died recently, and he suggested just going out to the game because there's just a lot of sadness in the house, and obviously with the mourning of his older brother and his parents' older son, just them being there at the Astros ballpark and playing a big role, I guess, in that game to win. I mean, he caught that ball, and it just meant so much for his family. And if you haven't read the article, I suggest you read it. They definitely did a better job of describing his story than I just did. But shout out to Carson Riley, and I'm sure he'll be rooting for the Astros as they play in the World Series this coming week. Yeah, so I want you guys to visit our website, TwoNatesOnSports.com. Also like us on Facebook at TwoNatesOnSports. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play Music, where you'll get a notification as soon as we release our new episodes. And you can also send us any comments and suggestions to our inbox at TwoNatesOnSports@gmail.com. Nathan, go Astros, and I will talk to you next week.
Talk to you then, man.